The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening. This is Ronda Dixon. I'm your host for the Legal Synopsis, where we talk about the intersection between social equity, social justice, racial equality, and constitutional law and how it affects things that are happening today. We're going to talk about a number of things that are happening today. We're right in the middle of a pandemic called COVID-19, and we're also in the middle of some major uprisings regarding social injustices and civil rights that have happened in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Today we're going to talk about mass incarceration and racial inequities in the criminal justice system. My guest today is attorney Lei-Chala Wilson. She's had a very long and great career as a public defender for over 24 years with the Law Office of San Diego Public Defender's Office. She's tried over 120 jury trials to conclusion, including homicide, sex offenses, and 3-strike serious felonies. She has won numerous awards, and I guess she's kind of like a serial volunteer. I always tell myself that I have to tape my mouth shut and my hand down, but I guess Lei-Chala didn't do that because she's been the past president of the Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association 3 times. That's the San Diego Bar Association, Black Bar Association. She's been the past president of the California Association of Black Lawyers, the past president of the National Council of Negro Women for San Diego section, and the NAACP president of the San Diego branch from 2009 to 2014. She's been honored as the Woman of the Year twice by the city of San Diego, as well as the 79th Assembly District. She's a frequent lecturer for the State Bar and Criminal Law section. She's on the Civil Rights Committee of the California Law Association. She is a lifetime member of the National Bar Association, which is the Black Bar Association. And the history of that is that the ABA wouldn't allow attorneys such as myself and Lei-Chala to be members, so we had to create our own. As per usual, we had to create our own bar association called the National Bar Association. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lei-Chala Wilson and have her introduce herself.
Thank you very
Good evening,
much,
Lei-Chala.
Ms. Dixon. I want to thank you, but one thing you forgot to tell people is that we were both in law school at UC Davis. I met you in 1986.
Yes.
So that means we've been friends, if I knew my math right, 34 years. And
that's true. Wait, Lei-Chala. I didn't want you to give that number out. I didn't want to get dated.
Every day above the ground is a good day. That's what Pitbull says, and that's the way I look at it.
That's true.
But I thought it was, important for people to know that we might be colleagues, but we were also friends. You're sort of instrumental because I was about ready to get out of Davis. Like, they don't have anyone that looks like me. They don't have any music. They got spiders. And I met you on the stairs in front of UC Davis, MLK, School of Law, King Hall.
That's right.
And that might have saved me, besides the fact my father told me if I was going to quit law school, I couldn't come back to San Diego County. And I was like, he can't do that. But anyway, here we go.
And you had a reluctant start, but you had a very enthusiastic, we're not ended yet, but you've had a very strong career as a public defender. And civil rights and just all the different public services that you've done, being the president of different organizations.
Well, my saying, and let me put it out there, you have no right to call yourself a black attorney unless you're serving the community. And that's how I feel, and that's what keeps, me going forward, because you have a right to maybe get tired, but you don't have a right to give up.
That's right. I mean, there's so much to do, It's like we become examples for our community, and we're the ones that fight for them. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and one of the major reasons I became a lawyer was because I wanted to fight for people that couldn't fight for themselves, and I saw all the inequities that were going on. So today we're going to talk about mass incarceration and the racial inequities in the justice system, and we both had some experience with that. Some of the major things I want to cover is, like, in your experience of being 24 years as a prosecutor.
Wait, back up.
Not a prosecutor, a public defender.
Okay, let's
public
get it right.
Defender. Sorry about that. Your experience is being 24 years as a public defender. What do you think about the racial inequities in the justice system? Give me some examples that you've seen.
Well, you have to look at, we got 50 states. And because I'm also on the California Lawyers Association Criminal Executive Committee, I've been on there since 1996. And so I know public defenders, DAs, up and down the state.
Yes.
And what people have to understand is, in California, you have public defenders, and then if there's a conflict, you got the alternate public defender, and then you have panels. But California is different than other places across the, state. They have, everyone doesn't have a public defender system, and of course I'm going to be biased, because the public defenders are in court every day. They know the judges. They know the DAs. You know where you got to settle a case, where you're not able to settle a case. And the reason I'm bringing this up, like Louisiana, is a mess. I can't believe that people are sitting in jail for months without ever seeing an attorney, where in California, whether it's 24 hours, 72 hours, you have to go to court or they have to release you. So there are people who come from mostly the southern states and other places, and they have a bad attitude towards public defenders. But those aren't public defenders. Sometimes it's private attorneys who are doing civil law, who have never done a civil case, who are taking cases, even sometimes as serious as death penalty cases. So I just need to put that out there. Now,
so I know you want to take up for the public defenders, and by and large, we do have a very good system here in California. We do.
Right.
And it's like your office. So what I've noticed is that the one thing about the public defender and the district attorney are usually assigned to a court. They know the judge. They know the opposing counsel, which is the district attorney, or the whatever the prosecutor is. It could be the city attorney, could be the attorney general, but they know the other side, and that kind of gives them a little bit of an advantage in negotiating.
Right. And so, I can't say I blatantly saw it. Sometimes you might suspect it, but normally these people won't laugh. But then yet there are still areas in California. And, okay, I'll tell you what the biggest problem is. In order to be a DA, you have to advance. How do you advance? You win cases. As a PD, of course we go to trial, but it's not really in our hands. If my client wants to go to trial, I have to go. Even if there's no defense, I don't have anything to do. Or if the DA says, I'm not giving you guys any offers, then why not go to trial? Because the way the system is set up, the DA is, I'll give up my right not to seek the maximum sentence if you give up your right for a jury trial. And
right.
So, okay.
So that's basically plea bargaining.
Right, essentially plea bargaining, and only 5% of cases go to trial.
So what do you think would happen, Lei-Chala, if everybody did a strike and said, I'm not going to plead, I'm going to take it to trial, and they have their constitutional right to a speedy trial? Would that break the system?
It will break the system, but what you're going to end up is having more people do more time. Because part of that 95% that doesn't go to trial, either is dismissed or it's reduced to a misdemeanor or an infraction. And once you talk to the attorney and they have the police reports, then you can look at the case, do a little investigation, and most of those cases resolve, and I think they're in the client's best interest. But when the DA says plead to everything, then what do you got to lose? You might as well go to trial.
Yes.
But there are steps along the way to try to settle the case. And although most people have the attitude, all public defenders want to deplete, we're trying to save you time. I love doing trials. I was a national mock trial winner at UC Davis. Let me throw that out
Yes.
there. I wanted to do trials. I can do trials standing on my head.
Right.
I don't mind going to trial, but I have to tell clients, okay, we're going to go to trial, but I tell you what, at noon I'm going to lunch, at 5:30 I'm going home. And don't expect me to serve your time with you. I'm not trying to make people plead guilty to something they didn't do, but they have to understand what their rights are, what their risks are, and I'm trying to save them time, because it doesn't matter whether I believe in them, what the DA thinks. If you go to trial, you got 12 people who determine what your fate is. And even though it says 12 people, your peers, they don't necessarily look like you. And, I don't want to digress into people serving jury duty, and then it's a whole different ballgame.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because that has a lot to do with people being found guilty and sometimes maybe not even having the proper amount of evidence, or just a sort of a bias that comes about. I know that when I was in law school, I actually worked for the DA's office in the appellate division, and we had a number of constitutional challenges to the jury selection process and the bias, looking at jury bias. What do you think about that? Have you seen that happen before?
Of course. Right now, Assembly Member Shirley Weber, and remember you met her last year when she was at my birthday gathering, she has a new bill, and I think her ideal is to limit the number of peremptory challenges. Because, you got challenge for cause, and what happens is, once in a while, when I get a black juror, they'll get up there and stand, I don't trust police. I'm not going to listen to them. Of course they're going to get kicked. So that's for cause. I try to rehabilitate them and say, Your Honor, it's not for cause. And I say, can you be fair? What about this? And so it's not really jury selection. It's jury deselection.
Yes.
And, the ones that I like, the DA's going to kick. The ones who like police, I'm going to kick, and it depends on what type of case, because police aren't always lying. Sometimes they're not even a witness.
But now, Lei-Chala, sometimes isn't there a penalty for that? Hasn't there been some case law that states that they can't choose to challenge if they're challenging just based on race?
Well, you're talking about Batson, Wheeler, and stuff, and that is a problem, but you can make a challenge as a defense attorney because, wait, there's only 2 black people, you kick them off, what's the basis? And then they have to have like a neutral basis for doing it. But you see it more down in the South than you do here. But you can do that, but the problem is, black people, they don't trust police. That's just how it is. And when they come into court and says, police officers testify, I'm not going to listen to them. I don't care what they say, I'm against them, then, they're going to get kicked off when they say they cannot do that. Sometimes they just want to get off, but the problem is you don't have enough people like us who are on the jurors who understand what the defendant is saying. But then yet they'll sit at home and say, well, I don't understand that verdict. Well, you need to do your jury service. At one time, not only could we not serve on juries, we couldn't even testify. And that's why you had all those unjust convictions, 30s, 40s, 50s. And if you saw, what was that movie? Thurgood.
Thurgood Marshall. He became a Supreme Court justice.
And it was that, but we have to serve. But I know when I say that in California, it's a lot easier when you're down south. And I don't know if you saw, Just Mercy.
Yes.
And that stuff still goes on. But it's really important not only for people to serve on juries, and that makes a difference. But you know how many times I've walked in courtrooms? I'm the only black person.
Yeah.
And I got clients, you got the judge, you got the clerk, and then you have, the prosecutor, you got the jurors. And sometimes you ask the question, can you, are you going to have a problem against my client because he's a different race? Let's say he's Filipino, but I always want to say, are you going to have a problem because he got the black attorney?
Yes, that can be an issue, too. I have a question, though. So how many times do you walk into the courtroom and your client is black and everyone else in the courtroom is not?
It happens because jurors don't show up. But, it was one of the most two trials. One, he just recently passed, Judge Valentine. He was black. His court clerk was black. The court reporter was black. The bailiff was black. And I was like, welcome,
Right. You don't see that very often.
And then I've been on trials that were very beautiful where even though the police officer, one was Native American, one was Filipino, and I can't remember what my client was. He might have been white, and maybe the prosecutor was Latino. And I thought it was nice. When these jurors come in, they say, okay, there's people of color that can do this job. And I think the judiciary, as well as people who represent or prosecute, should look like the people who come before them. That's very important.
Yes, diversity on the bench and in the courtroom is extremely important.
Wait, let me just hit one thing, because I remember one time when I was out in El Cajon, and it wasn't my case. I was supervising out there, and I went in the courtroom, and I saw this black defendant, but everyone was white, from the judge, clerk, jurors. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter whether or not he was guilty. It's the perception of justice.
Yes.
And so that really hurt me at that time. Like, it didn't matter whether he did it or not, but no one looked like him. Then I go to getting people to do jury service. And then the other thing that people can do, you can court watch.
Yes.
You can go into any courtroom because they're all public. And go in there and watch and be the voice. Stand up for people. And I don't want to get into voting rights, but let's get to your
Well, it would also be important to vote for judges because it's funny, but whenever the judges come up, and that's a very important position, as we can see now by how the Supreme Court has been stacked, but there's all these other courts along the way, and when we have judges that make biased decisions, that affects everyone. And the problem is that we are not, as involved because most people don't know anything about these judges. And my understanding, I've talked to people before, and they said, well, at the DA's office, there's not much room for upward mobility. So it seems that a lot of prosecutors run for or become appointed to be judges. And so it's sort of overrepresented from that standpoint. And I know that for years, I do criminal law now as well, but for years I did entertainment law, and part of that time I also did construction litigation and just general litigation. And what I was upset about sometimes is you get before a judge. Most judges did not know anything about civil litigation. They certainly didn't know anything about recording contract, little nuanced and niche markets like recording contracts and construction litigation. And it was really upsetting to go before judges that actually had no real experience whatsoever. So it's very few consumer lawyers that end up becoming judges. There's very few general litigators that become judges. Most of the judges tend to be ex-prosecutors. And I know you guys, we talked about this one time, and you were telling me that in San Diego they tried to change that. And I know here in Los Angeles that's the situation, is most of the judges are ex-prosecutors. I would hazard to say 95% are ex-prosecutors.
Okay.
Here in L.A. County.
In San Diego, half the people I work with are on the bench. And you have to remember, there's two ways to the bench. One, you can run for office. Two, you get appointed by the governor if there's an open seat or someone leaves a little bit earlier. Then you have at the county bars who do the evaluations, and I was on it for 6 years for the San Diego County Bar. But people apply, and also depends who's governor. Normally, when you have a Republican governor, they appoint prosecutors. When you have a Democratic governor, they appoint public defenders. And that stayed the same, and I don't care. It was Gray Davis who wouldn't appoint public defenders because, oh, wait, what if they make a ruling and they're worried about that? And so that's how we got out of balance. But when then Governor Brown came in, what, was the third or fourth time, Jerry Brown?
Yes.
He did a lot of public defenders. If I go in that courtroom or over the courthouse, half the people I worked with. But I remember in the beginning, I said, oh, all these people on the bench, they must be smart, because I wasn't used to how the system worked. And I'm talking about back in 1989. That's over 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. But now I know. Some people get there because they're connected, but otherwise you have evaluations. I'm getting them all the time. Some people I know, some people I don't. But then when it becomes an election, then you have a say in it, especially if it's contested. Some people, people don't run against them because before they consolidated the courts, there was municipal court, you only ran your jurisdiction, and you had Superior Court, but it was consolidated. So now you have to run county-wide. And this was like 10 or 15 years ago. It takes $250,000. Most people don't have that money to do that. So there's other ways in, but I think L.A. might have, 52, 57 courtrooms. In San Diego, there's 5. I'm not talking about jurisdictions, because you got downtown, El Cajon, San Diego, North County, and juvenile. So because we have 57 or 58 counties, they may all be a little different.
Right.
And you've got to know the right people and stuff. And then that's what makes a difference. But still, you have to show up for jury duty. And
well, I'd say that's important. But Lei-Chala, people do. One of the strategies that the district attorneys use, whether it's right or wrong, is to actually take the the minorities off the jury for the most part, and try to the voir dire is really important, and a lot of people don't understand. So voir dire is when it's a French word that means to see and to say, and what you're doing is you're interviewing the potential jury members and asking them questions to see if they're biased. And many times there's a knee-jerk reaction that certain people are going to be biased. They even do mock jury trials to see what types of people will vote a certain way. That's what people do in some high-profile cases.
I think that, maybe for high-profile, maybe for civil litigation focus groups, but I don't think DAs and PDs, I almost maybe did one, but it costs a lot of money. But instead of a focus group, there's 2 ways. I do it on experience, and I use my family for a focus group.
Well, your family is not a jury of our peers.
I had one where the guy just picked up a little kid playing down. He was drunk. And I asked my sister, I said, well, if you were on the jury, what would you go? He's a dead man. You better not touch. I said, well, dang, I didn't think it was a big deal. Then I had to go to court and say, oh, I think we better settle this case for false imprisonment instead of attempted kidnapping, because he would have done life. So I don't think on your average criminal case they do it. It's a high profile. They got a lot of money. They can do it. But I've never done a focus group. I don't think the DAs do it because
Well, the city attorneys do, because one of our good friends from law school is a city attorney up in Sacramento, and I went to visit her, and she was in the middle of putting together a focus group.
Okay, but what type of case was it?
This was a liability case, maybe. I think it
civil.
might have been a wrongful death against the city.
Okay, that's
Yes.
civil, but I'm talking about, because most city attorneys just do misdemeanor, or they represent the city. So
Well, but they also can do, they have a broad range. They represent the city and everything. So I think this one was actually the case. I don't want to, disclose anything, the facts that might make somebody know what case it is. But it seemed to be a wrongful death case.
Right, that's still civil. But I'm talking about normally misdemeanors, like in San Diego.
No, not in a misdemeanor case, but I've seen people do focus groups on.
They do it because there's a lot of money at stake.
Right, if it's a big case.
But I'm talking about petty theft. They're not going to do a focus group
But
on there.
Lei-Chala, this is what I want to ask. We're talking about mass incarceration, and we're talking about racial inequities in the system. Do you think that you had more clients that were African American or black, or there's always this term, people want to change the name. And actually, I had someone on a few weeks ago, and they wanted to call us the slave nation, and then there's another group that wants to call us the the American descendants of slavery, ADOS.
We're not descendants of slavery. We were enslaved. I prefer the term black only because it's one syllable. African American is 7, but I will use African American, more formally.
But the problem with African American, which somebody did bring up to me, is that's actually an immigration status, and Elon Musk is African American, so it doesn't really talk about race, because to the extent that there are people that are white that are actually born in Africa, which there are a lot. If they immigrate here, then that's the immigration status of being African American. We were not immigrated here; we were forcibly brought here.
I'm not worried about Elon Musk. He can go to the moon.
Pardon me?
But I'm not worried about Elon.
No, I'm just giving him as an example of a person that would be actually considered African American.
Right. Well, I'm still going to use black, African American, or...
So I like black because I think it's because of when we grew up. I mean, it's because of our age, and there was a few different changes. My actual birth certificate says Negro.
Mine
and
does
then and then after that it was black, and then it was Afro-American, and then it became African American. But I liked Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. So, and the Black Power sign. So basically, that sort of resonates with me, and it's sort of like, you get stuck in this time warp, and I just like black. Like I said, it's short, it's to the point, and I don't know how political it is, but it just seems to me that was the time when we were coming of age in the civil rights movement, and we changed the name from Negro to black, and that was a major change. Now, when the shift to African American, that seemed to be a political shift, but it wasn't a shift that was made by the people.
Well, I would say it's a non-issue, a wedge issue, and we don't need to spend time.
So, Lei-Chala, do you think you had more black defendants than other groups based on did you think it was a disproportionate?
In San Diego, I would say a quarter of my clients were black, a quarter were white, a quarter were Asian, a quarter were Hispanic or Latino. Where you see the differentiation is what crimes were committed. So,
okay. So where did you see an overrepresentation of black people? That's what I'm trying to find out.
Not in San Diego, but our population's only 5 or 6%.
Right. So that is an overpopulation. If 25% or more of your...
And remember, I'm only one attorney out of 300
right.
Private attorneys. So I can only base it on the cases I held. I mean, that I, represented people on. But you can almost tell if there's a street robbery, they're going to be black. And if it's, the car shop, they're probably going to be Asian. If it's DUI,
Let's not stereotype, Lei-Chala.
Huh?
Let's not stereotype now.
Well, that's why I just stopped. So, but people commit crimes in their own neighborhoods, and it depends what's available. And I don't know if you saw that, I don't know if I sent you a cartoon where they have a guy looting coming out with a TV, but then you have the white guy with a big bag of money coming out of the treasury, and he calls him an amateur.
Yeah.
So you commit crime.
Right. Well, we do see that.
Have the opportunity.
Yes.
We don't do the bank crime. Bank robberies, I think I've only had one, because normally it goes federal. But
yes.
They know who commits a certain crime. But because if you're not working on Wall Street and stuff, you don't have the opportunity to do that. So they do the street crime.
What about drug crimes? What about low-level drug crimes? Have you ever seen situations where you feel people were up-leveling the charges and you have wobblers that should be misdemeanors that they're insisting on making them felonies?
Well, now it's changed, but yet remember, it's not that they're upping it, but at one time, meth, wobbler. So who normally does meth? White people.
Yes.
So they got the misdemeanors. But crack cocaine, heroin, and stuff were felonies. So it wasn't like they were changing it, but that's how the law was.
Yeah, but the law itself, we found that was inequitable right there.
They just threw everyone in jail, and then all of a sudden when meth became a problem, you see, say no to meth. I'm like, why didn't y'all say no to crack? Now you got the problem with the opiates. And now all of a sudden it's an epidemic, but it wasn't an epidemic with what we use. We weren't on opiates because you could go in the hospital with your arm hanging off and they just give you an aspirin. Mm-hmm. So we tended not to get addicted to those drugs because we didn't have access. And even though it's changing, because, all these people are ODing and stuff, and maybe black people start doing it, but you can't OD on something you don't have access to.
Yes.
And, you got the fentanyl coming over, and I just saw articles today where they were talking about the COVID-19 has interrupted the drug trade. So
really? Messed up their profits too, huh? Are they going to get an economic recovery loan?
Right, and so it's because, you don't got the planes, you don't have the ships and stuff coming in. But
yes.
The problem with America is it has an insatiable appetite for drugs. The problem is when people selling it, people here want it. So, the econ major, you got supply or demand. Some people believe in supply demand. If demand goes down, then supply goes down. It's almost like cigarettes. People here were smoking a lot.
Yes.
Now it went down. Now they're taking it over to other countries. But it's supply and demand. And
so let's talk about some things. I want to get your opinion on some of the things that are happening right now with the George Floyd. Now, I know you don't do criminal defense of police officers.
No,
but have you ever encountered qualified immunity, and what do you know about qualified immunity? Let's talk about some of the defenses that they might raise.
Well, the problem you have, if you understand the history of qualified immunity, it actually started back in, I think it was 1871, after the end of the Civil War. And the purpose was because the Union had defeated the Confederacy, and it was end of slavery, you had all this stuff going on. So you had all these racist protest acts going. And there was a case where I think it was a black man and a white man who were protesting, but they were in a segregated area and they got arrested. So they were trying to protect the police from being able to, do their job, even though they lied about the case. Then all of a sudden you get the Police Protection Act, which essentially today is, the police rights.
Yes.
And that's why it's a problem. So it was known back then as the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871.
Wow.
And the Civil Rights Act of 1871. So that anyone acting under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom who deprives some of their constitutional rights could be sued by their victims. So they were trying to protect the police so they didn't have these frivolous suits. But the problem is it's not really codified. and the judges sort of mess with it. And even like the Supreme Court just recently declined to hear a case on it.
Wow.
So the problem you have with George Floyd is he, did the knee. But you have to find either a Supreme Court case or the circuit where the person is at. He's in the circuit. That shows there's a case that says, well, you knew if you bent on someone's, kneel down on someone's knee, they would die. And the problem is it's not illegal. So that's some of the action that's going on now where they're trying to ban it because we know it's dangerous. So you have a problem with whether or not they're going to get a conviction. But remember, we're talking civil and criminal.
Yes.
They prosecute, that's one thing. And then the family, if they go away, but then they want justice. And there's only two ways to get justice. You either do it in the streets or you do it in the courts. So, they're probably represented either by, I think, Ben Crump is one of them, a past National Bar Association. You got
Lee Merritt.
Chris, you got Lee Merritt, you got Daryl K. Washington,
yes,
who are going after it. It doesn't bring the person back, but there's only two ways to hurt someone: beat them up or take their money.
So,
and people in a capitalist society that we live in, money works.
But money can't replace a life, though. I know that. Wasn't there a case in 1982 that the Supreme Court reinforced qualified immunity and gave it more strength, and that's one of the major reasons why it's so difficult to prosecute a police officer, because in the course of their job they're immune. But talk about color of law, isn't there a time at which you can say they stepped outside the boundaries of their job, and then at that point they're subject to be sued?
Well,
they lose their qualified immunity, because that's why it's qualified. It's not blanket immunity, it's qualified immunity.
Right, and they're hard to beat. And there was a 1982 case, and that's why people are sort of upset, and I think Congress is taking it up now, trying to get rid of it. Supreme Court wouldn't take it up, so Congress has to do it and get rid of it. But it's not a real law. It's judicial, and people are upset because the judges who are making it are unelected.
Yes.
Remember, you got the election for, your local governors. Federal is appointed by the Senate, so they're not elected. And plus, it's a lifetime appointment.
Yes, I don't think they should be lifetime appointments, honestly. In looking at the cases with the Supreme Court, and, we look at Plessy versus Ferguson, we look at the Dred Scott decision.
Don't take me back to law school, please.
I know, but I was fascinated with constitutional law. But we get into those cases that were horrible law. Remember how we always said that, bad cases make bad law. And
bad facts make bad law. That's how we got the three strikes law.
Yes.
In 1994.
Right. And, they used to, I guess the three strikes law now is better than, remember the Skinner case where they literally would castrate a person? They said that after 3 times, they said that person was a habitual recidivist, a habitual criminal, and that they would pass that gene on to their children, and therefore they actually made that a case for castrating people.
Well, remember at one time, even though our system's not perfect, as the jury system, but do you remember at one time, if you walk across hot coals and make it through, then you were innocent.
Right, that was the witch hunt.
Like
yes.
an ankle, and if they put you in the water, and if you come up, then you were innocent. So our system's not perfect. And the system, the way it's supposed to work, is perfect. But you have people, with motives. You got people with biases. You got, jurors like, well, I've been ripped off 3 times. I didn't catch a person. Let me get back at them. Sometimes there's so much stuff is going on, but I can't think of a better system. And the only other
now, Lei-Chala, I can. I'm going to just say we need to be more involved in the process of selecting these judges. I don't think some of these people are qualified for their job. And like I said, when I go before a judge, I would rather go to mediation or arbitration with someone that knows the business that I'm in rather than to go before some of these judges, because most of them are just criminal law lawyers and they really don't have any experience. So they really don't know when there's been a breach of contract or when something has gone wrong. And I don't like that. The other thing that I think is that judges should not serve life terms. They should be staggered in and out, and I think there's been people discussing that because it's just like what happened now where you get the court stacked. If a system, the reason why I say this isn't the best system, if a system can be manipulated to the extent that this system has been, then it can't be the best system because it's been manipulated and it's subject to manipulation.
Jury service. I'd rather have the jurors decide guilt or innocence. The judge is out of it. All they can do is decide whether it's sentenced or not. So I'm not talking about the whole system. I'm not talking about federal court.
Well, what about when they decide what evidence is admissible and what isn't admissible? What about there's just certain things about the demeanor that, and this is where systemic racism becomes a part. Because many of the sitting judges are over the age of 65. Many of them are, older.
You know why? Because it's the way, the retirement system. And you don't get a pension like the newer ones until you've done at least 20 years. So a lot of them, if you wait until you're like 45 or 50, you got to do your 20 in order to get a pension.
Right.
But I'm just talking about the jury system, the way it's supposed to work. Not the way it does work.
Well,
and that's why you have a challenge, and that's why you can do research on a judge, and you can not go to that judge.
Well, I also think that systemic, from being from the standpoint of practicing criminal law myself, I just see systemic racism playing a role in the jury's deliberation processes. And even the fact that we think, okay, if it's this type of crime, it's usually going to be this person. Have you ever had a situation where you had somebody come before you that wasn't guilty?
Of course. I'm on the majority of my cases.
But even if it's not a question, I mean, there's some cases where the prosecutor has the discretion to bring the case. And a lot of times I find they're not using that discretion in the manner of, you're the gatekeeper. Let's go for the real criminals. Let's not just go for this one. We know we can find that person guilty because that's the usual suspect. That's the person that most people would think did this, even though they didn't. I've seen that happen where prosecutors will keep a fish on the hook. They'll keep that person there just because they don't really have all the evidence. I have a case right now where they've been kicking it down the road and the fingerprint evidence came back and my client wasn't in the car, period. And it's a grand theft auto, but they will not dismiss the case.
Right. And, then you go up higher. Talk to the supervisor. Talk to the DA. The actual DA. But that's like one case. But I say overall, those people don't last. You can get rid of them. But remember, my experience in San Diego versus your experience in L.A.
How long have you had a case? Because this case is going on 2 years, actually. It's a criminal matter, grand theft auto.
I maybe had a murder case, but that's only because there was a lot of discovery.
Right. That's a lot more serious. Yes.
I've done some in less than 7 months. And I think we don't want to get into specific cases. So.
But it's a constitutional violation to wait so long.
Right. And then you file a speedy trial violation motion. There's other motions you can file in order to do something.
Okay. So what do you think? What are your suggestions for how to fix the system as far as the racial inequities and the mass incarceration? Because black people are overrepresented, both male and female, in the prison population. And they say right now that black females are getting incarcerated at a lot, much more alarming rate.
I'm going to go back to voting. I'm going to go to, voting and contacting your legislature. Because, whether it's local, whether it's, the state. And talk to them because, Dr. Weber is doing one on jury selection. She's trying to get Prop 209 overturned, remember, from 1996.
Is she the one that made that introduced the bill regarding the police, having to have, and
the use of force?
Right, the use of force with police. They had to have
one way, but you sometimes have to compromise. But then you have to go to city council meetings. You have to hold the DA who is elected to the fire. And if not, you can run against them. But the power lies with the people. And you can't just sit on the sidelines and say, I don't like this, I think this messed up. What are you going to do? And
I don't think that people know. I mean, Lei-Chala, you've been involved in the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, other different organizations. I think we also have to be, like, I'm a member of Califia now and Los Angeles African American Women's Political Action Committee. So we work on selecting candidates and supporting candidates and supporting legislation. But I don't think a lot of people honestly understand these things. I think it goes above their heads, and they really don't. And I know when you're talking about black people, because I've talked to them in a grassroots level, they just don't think their vote counts, and they are constantly saying, many people have felonies, and and they can't. They say I can't vote, and then I explain to them, yes, you can vote even with the felony, as long as you're not on probation or parole, you can vote, and they might even be changing that rule. Pardon me?
I used to do community forums, and sometimes 50, 60 people showing up. But if I can reach one, that's what I can do. But a lot of people are complaining they're not doing anything. The information's out there. I was always putting out information, doing forums, inviting everyone to come. As I always said, an informed community is a better community. But all I know is if you don't vote, you don't want the information, please don't complain.
Well, now, Lei-Chala, I'm going to be the devil's advocate a little bit, because there was an article that was written by another black female attorney saying that we had an abusive relationship, that black people are in an abusive relationship with the Democratic Party. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to vote Democratic, but what I am saying is that we need to hold the party accountable, because we are the voters. We do vote, and we need to hold them accountable for doing things that are beneficial to our people. I mean, the Voting Rights Act was up during Bill Clinton's term, and he did not make that bulletproof. He did not make that act permanent. And then it came up again during a Republican, and it was gutted. The Voting Rights Act was gutted to the extent that we see major violations happening right now as we speak. Right now in the state of Kentucky, they've actually closed almost 95% of the voting booths, and then they put out ballots that they claim, people asked for the ballots early for the mail-in ballots, but they claim that they sent them to the wrong people or they had mistakes on the ballot, so they don't want to count those early voting ballots. Now everybody just has to go to the polls, which is going to probably benefit McConnell, who we want to get out of there, but that's just a blatant violation of the Voting Rights Act, I think.
Right, and that was Shelby v. Holder and Citizens versus United, those cases. But the problem is the person, we're not going to get into politics, who's in the office now, if more people would have came out. But the problem we have to do, we got to get the people out, and we got to get rid of this voter suppression. But the problem is we got to take over the Senate. And I know in Wisconsin, they had the same problem, but the people stood there. Here, of course, in California, you have, absentee ballot. It's very easy, and they're going to do all of that. They don't want us to win, but we got to do it. We've been fighting for voting rights, since the 1800s?
Right, but I'm saying that the Democratic Party, when they have a chance to do that, they did not do it.
They really didn't, because...
And so we need to hold them accountable, because it's not enough that we participate. They're not coming through on their end. It's just like one person said, it's not up to us anymore to stop racism. It's up to the people that are racist to stop being racist.
Well, they don't think they're racist, so that's not going to happen.
Well, we're getting them woke, though. We're getting them woke.
Yeah, we're getting them woke.
They're looking at it now.
There's a lot of issues. I always tell people, being black in America is like playing a 52 card, playing the game of 52 card pickup. And what it is, I don't know if you know, you throw up a deck of cards. Oh, I got to worry about economics. I got to worry about property. I got to worry about the children. And we're trying to catch so many cards. But I still think voting makes a difference. Maybe you have to stand in line. I know I'm not, because I don't have to. But the Senate controls everything. And even when Obama got in there, President forever, Obama, they said, we'll make sure you're one term. They were a party of no.
Well, they couldn't make sure he was one term, but
we got to flip that. We got to flip it.
Well, what we have to do, too, is make sure that our voice is heard, because it's not just enough that I vote, I do everything I can, and I see that you do that, too. But they need to hear us and start giving us what we need, because they're not. Even when they are elected, they're not doing it.
For granted, but then the thing is, you got two choices, Trump or Biden. And I don't give any things about Biden, but be better than Trump. So
we're gonna do what we have to do, but the point is they have to do with that too. They can't just take our vote for granted.
Supposedly you're going to get a woman, and then they're saying a woman of color. Some people say it doesn't matter.
I think it does matter, because I think that, let's not get a whole bunch into the politics thing, but I just don't think Biden has that personality that's going to bring the young people out. And in order to bring in order to win, you have to bring them out. So his vice president has to be the person that can do that.
It doesn't matter. Do you want another 4 years of Trump or not?
Well, young people don't think like we do. They don't have that causal thinking. So we need to get them out there, and we need somebody that can inspire them to come out and vote.
Well, it's a no-brainer. Soon day I turned 18, I voted. I've never missed an election, and maybe I'm a different type of person.
Well, I'm the same as you, but we got to talk to those people that aren't doing it. But anyway, let's talk about the law. So let's say that in my experience, I've seen definite inequity in the law. Just me walking into court, I see too many blacks and Latinos on the wrong side of the law. I see mostly judges. I've seen a little bit more diversity on the bench, but that doesn't always guarantee a fair shot either, because some judges are highly conservative or biased, and they might even be black and be biased and conservative. So, that's just the way it is. I think part of it is that when you're a prosecutor, because I know that happened to Kamala Harris, where she's getting negative pushback, but you can't be a successful prosecutor in the California or in any state and not put a lot of black people behind bars. That's just how it works. Systemic racism has been responsible for that kind of, ever since the 14th Amendment had that huge basic loophole in it, basically, that said that, except for servitude, penal servitude, that just opened the door for the criminal justice system to be the next plantation. That's basically it.
Well, that's true, but then again, I know some people say the black community's over police. You got to realize they're out there for a reason, because you got the other half of the community saying, how come you're not helping us?
All right, Lei-Chala, now we're going to get into it, because the reason that people are in trouble in the community is for the other types of discrimination that come about. Job discrimination, economic discrimination. Those things oppress people and keep them down, and there's not a lot of options. Drug use and homelessness. We could talk about, how systemic racism has, especially here in Los Angeles, but I'm sure it's down there too, the huge population of people that are homeless, 60% of those people being African American. And that comes from the systemic, that comes from years. You talk about generational wealth. We've got generational poverty that is putting us down. They say by the year 2035 or something like that. Right now, the average African American woman, not us, but the average one, has $3 to $5 in her bank account. In this great state.
Financial health, but some of them are problems, and I know they're problems. But if you go into a store and stick your gun in someone's face, right?
And then maybe people are desperate, so that's a whole nother thing. But let's. I'm going to have to wrap it up now.
Okay.
We're we have to end the show pretty
But
soon.
see, you're making me sound like the bad person.
I'm not, but you are kind of moving on the prosecutor's side here. I mean, maybe you got jaded from being in the courtroom too much with these people.
I didn't get jaded, but I know what goes on.
But I see a lot of people that are not guilty or that are being up-leveled. Their charges are up-leveled, and that may not be happening in San Diego, but I think it is because I practice down there too.
No, there are people who do plead guilty in order to get out. I had a perfect self-defense of others. And then they offered him a non-strike credit for time served out. And he goes, Miss Wilson, I know you believe that I got a good defense, I can get out, and you can beat this case, but I got to get back to work. And I would say, don't plead guilty to something you didn't do. But I can't stop people from pleading guilty.
Right, and the fact that they have to, that they have to be faced with that decision, a lot of times it's because they're black.
Well, that's why you have bail reform. That's why we're trying to do police reform.
That's what I was going to ask you, too, real quick. Do you think that it affects people negatively when they are, incarcerated during the time that they are, fighting their case?
Of course it does. It makes it harder for the attorney to work with the client because you got to go out to the jail. Talk to them on the phone, and of course when a client's out of custody, it's a lot easier. And then you get trial, you got to get them dressed out so they're not in the jail clothes. So of course it's easier. So at least they're working on bail reform.
And people will be more inclined to plead to get out. If I'm in jail waiting, I'm not even guilty, but I just want to get out of jail because jail is not a good place to be.
It's no different than getting a traffic ticket. One time I didn't think it was right, but then for me to go to traffic court, then another hearing, it was cheaper to pay the ticket. And so that does happen, but I've always told clients, don't plead to something you didn't do. But it was easy for me to say because I was going home that night.
Right.
So I've had a couple, that I know, I'm like, you shouldn't plead guilty, but I can't make them. I had one guy who didn't want to come back to court anymore. I said, I don't care. I'm setting this motion, and I got the case dismissed. But he was whining. He didn't want to come back, but he was out of custody. But I went there and set a motion anyway. So there's a lot of stories. Some are guilty, some aren't. And hopefully I never, have a case that's going to come back. And I think I'm safe now that someone pled guilty or, got convicted and I didn't do my job right.
Right, because you could get ineffective assistance of counsel. But, I believe you're safe now, so we got to wrap this up. So what do you think about the unrest that we've had so far? What do you think about this? The civil unrest we have with the George Floyd, what is your thinking on this?
I'm not for destruction of property, and I'm not for rioting. I'm not for looting, but it sure got their attention, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
And it's so nice that you see people of all colors who are finally got woke, who learned about Juneteenth, who learned the history, because they certainly do not teach it to you in grade school. Oh, the slaves were happy, we did them a favor. But now people are like, I was talking to a friend earlier today, she goes, one of her white friends called up and she's mad because she didn't know about Tulsa, she didn't know about Rosewood. So these people don't know what's going on. We've been telling them that for the last, I don't know how many years.
Yes.
And so they didn't understand. But even down 6th Avenue, they had over 1,000 skaters. Closed it out, went all the way down to Embarcadero, and I'm looking, I'm like, gosh, these are black guys on skateboards. It was white guys.
Yes.
And I don't know if you looked at that. I Can't Breathe.
Yes.
But, it's powerful. And I'm hoping this time it's not a blip because,
I hope so, too. I went to one, and it was so funny. Somebody made up a song, You About to Lose Your Job. And I loved it. I was at the one in Lamert Park where they did a Juneteenth celebration, and somebody did a song, You About to Lose Your Job, because that one video that somebody did on TikTok where they were telling somebody who was being a Karen that they were going to lose their job behind being a Karen, so now it was just so funny, but somebody made a song about it, which I think is great. Yeah, so we have to wrap it up now. So thank you very much, Lei-Chala, for being,
having me,
for being on today.
On speaking terms afterwards.
Okay, we still are on speaking terms. You know, we agree to disagree. That's not going to affect our friendship.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So once again, my guest was Lei-Chala Wilson, attorney Lei-Chala Wilson, who's had a long career as a public defender, and now she's in private practice, and she practices litigation, personal injury, as well as criminal law. She also sits on several sections of the state bar and does a lot of education around criminal law and civil rights. Thank you. This has been the Legal Synopsis. My name is Ronda Dixon. I specialize in criminal law, entertainment law, and some other, things. But I have the 877-DUILady.com. You can reach me there. You can call me at 877-384-5239. And you can go to my website, 877-DUILady.com. Thank you, and it's been great speaking with you today, and hope to see you again.